Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm really inspired by what's happening in St. Joseph. I think it really is a community problem where everybody needs to work together in a multifaceted way to actually conquer these invasive species. And I wanted to start by just showing you what a nice wetland looks like, a nice wetland edge. This is the sort of thing that inspires me to get out there and work, where you have elderberry and goldenrod and a nice biological diversity, and that's what we're really aiming for. So let's see. So to tell you a little bit about our group, which is the Mid-Michigan Stewardship Initiative, Erin gave you a nice intro, but basically our goal is to do what you're doing here today, to bring together volunteers and experts and public agencies to really tackle these invasive species problems in a multifaceted way. And we focus on invasive species control mainly on garlic mustard, Japanese knotweed, and Phragmites. We also do some woody invasive species control and black swallowwort. And we also create native plant demonstration gardens, because it's no fun killing things and then not having native plants return. So we do both. And this is our knotweed control team, park manager, another MSU professor, a stewardship network person, and some volunteers. And so we're a small group. There are really 4 or 5 of us who are out there in the field doing work, but you can do an awful lot if you're motivated. And so Japanese knotweed, so this is what it looks like when it's in full bloom, which it usually is in August. These plants can be between about 6 and maybe 12 feet tall typically. And when you look up close, you see this bamboo-like stem. It's not solid red, but it's streaked green and red. And these roughly heart-shaped leaves, although they're really cut across the bottom, so they're kind of an unusual leaf shape. And what happened is, like many other plants, it turns out that about 200,000 different plants have been imported into the United States from elsewhere. So it's not surprising that some of those plants would not have brought their predators along with them, the insects that normally eat them or the animals that normally eat them. And so a certain number of these species are really uncontrolled in our environment, and that's the basic issue. So in the case of Japanese knotweed, it was introduced from Asia as an ornamental at about the same time it entered into the UK. And we're actually very lucky here because we mainly have Japanese knotweed in the female form, produces seeds that are sterile because they've never been fertilized. Whereas in the UK, they have the male and the female plants, and the problem is exponentially worse. So this is my colleague Lori Kaufman standing by a close relative of Japanese knotweed called giant knotweed. And instead of having leaves that are about 6 inches long, you can see that these leaves are more like 15 inches long. It's like Japanese knotweed on steroids. And just to allow you to compare, this is actually a colony of the hybrid between giant knotweed and Japanese knotweed that I found when I was on vacation in Cape Breton. It's like kind of dangerous to, once you recognize these things, you see them where you don't want to see them. But a giant stand of what is this hybrid, now it produces fertile seeds instead of infertile seeds, and it has a leaf shape in between this giant knotweed and Japanese knotweed. So I'll show you a more detailed picture of that. Japanese knotweed leaves are shaped like this. They're cut across or truncated at the bottom, so they're not truly heart-shaped. They're kind of flat-based and maybe about as big as my hand. The giant knotweed leaves are close to 12 inches long, and then the intermediate, the hybrid between these two, is intermediate in size and shape. And there are excellent resources both on the MISSIN website and also this website called MichiganInvasives.org has another set of training modules and fact sheets that will help you identify these plants. So plants people often get confused with Japanese knotweed. You hear heart-shaped leaves, lush growth. Often these other species are reported to us. Redbud has heart-shaped leaves, but it's easy to tell apart because it has branching stems that are woody. So instead of being reed-like or bamboo-like, they're woody. Similarly with northern catalpa, a really beautiful native tree that makes you think that you're in the Caribbean instead of Michigan. Very lush flowers, branching woody stems, and it flowers in early summer, not at the end of the summer. And the most commonly mistaken plant for knotweed is pokeweed, which is a native Michigan plant. The stems are kind of shockingly bright red pink. They're softer. They're not bamboo-like at all when you go up to them. And then they have these unusual flowers that are pink, that produce these berries that start white and go to deep purple. And so really the pink flowers and round berries and not having jointed reeds will help you distinguish these. So what makes knotweed so bad? Well, it's not its fault. It has a very nice place in its homeland of Japan where it actually evolved to grow on lava. And so that's really why it's got such an aggressive root system that can go into cracks in cement or asphalt and branch out and crack them open. It evolved to grow in a very harsh environment of establishing on lava. And one of its methods of reproduction is really largely vegetative in growth. It sends out rhizomes, and in each of these joints in the rhizome, you can send out new stalks with new leaves. And if you cut off a stalk and you lay that somewhere else, its joints in the stalks can grow new roots. And so it's really a great vegetative propagator. And the thing that's really concerning is that less than 1 gram of rhizome, about the size of your fingernail, can start a new plant. And so this tells you that basically the very worst thing you can do is mow or cut knotweed, because each of those fragments that you create can start a new plant, or even multiple new plants if it's chopped up. And so, and another thing that happens, just like with Phragmites, when you cut the stalks off, the plant says, oh no, they've come to get me, I'm going to send my roots out sideways. And so we find this often, like in Phragmites patches, like with Japanese knotweed patches. You think you've controlled this central colony, but you look 30 feet that way and there's a new colony that's jumped up from a root that's gone underground. So it's really very good to control yourself. It's really tempting to prune or cut or mow, but just don't touch the stalks and it will stay much more localized. And the issue is that there are no significant herbivores, insects, or pathogens of Japanese or giant knotweed in the Western world. There's nothing. You'll see Japanese beetles on it, which is kind of nice, but they just nibble a little bit and then they stop. So we just wish they would keep on going. There is a sign that some biocontrols have been tested in the UK that seem to be some weevils that control Japanese knotweed well. To my knowledge, they've not been tested in the US yet, but the Forest Service is working hard to encourage that kind of testing. So problems with Japanese knotweed, because it likes to grow in lava, likes to get its roots into cracks of hard substrate, it can establish in the foundations of your house or between, this is like an air intake on a building with a parking lot next to it, gets in these cracks, and once it gets in these cracks and under pavement, it's really very difficult to control because you can't get it most of the plant. You just have these little wispy things. And so one of the local drain commissioners had a piece like this coming out of his house, and he said he'd been trying to kill that little piece for 10 years. And so what you really also want to do is keep it away from your foundations and away from pavement. This is the kind of horror story that can happen ecologically, which is what my group is really motivated to prevent. If Japanese knotweed gets on rivers, you can imagine the stalks are kind of draping over the water, there's a storm, the water whips down and breaks the stalk off and it goes downstream. Well, in the Olympic Peninsula, which is a spectacular place, a rainforest, if you've never been there, they found that one clump of Japanese knotweed within 5 years had started almost 19,000 new stalks downriver. And this picture looks kind of lush until you realize that everything you see, this is all Japanese knotweed here. And what's a little bit worse is the beavers say, oh great, I've got some new building material. Let's build a dam out of Japanese knotweed. And so they're cutting the stalks and transplanting them, and these stalks of course can grow because they're still green, so they can start plants. So it's just kind of the thing that made me realize that whenever you have Japanese knotweed on a waterway or when it's being mowed on the roadside, you really need to take the most intelligent possible control method you can to keep it from creating this sort of situation. I also wanted to point out that for a while, I'm not sure exactly when it stopped being sold in nurseries, but variegated Japanese knotweed was sold too. And I've seen this one place, actually in the dumping ground for a nursery near where I live, where you get these kind of colorful pink and green and white spotted leaves with red stems, and you look close and you say, it's just knotweed in disguise. So I would look out for this too, because it may be near homes where it was planted. And there is a law in Michigan that it's one of the prohibited plant species, and what you cannot do is you cannot sell it or grow it intentionally, and you also cannot spread it by creating fragments. So actually cutting or mowing knotweed is against the law in Michigan because it can propagate it so easily. So this is a Missing mapping system that Erin was telling you about. I think mapping the locations and keeping a spreadsheet of them so you can, it's like a battle campaign. Once you know all your sites, you can develop a strategy, go from site to site to site every year, and control it on a regional level. So really these maps are wonderful tools for us. And this is really looking at the whole southern Michigan. You can see it looks like we don't have much in the Lansing area, but this is like a highly underreported species, and so I added 88 new sightings to the missing list this year alone in our area. And if you zoom in on this map, you can really see where it's already known to be in your area, St. Joe. So this, is, I'm sure, is an underreport too for your area. So when we started this project, we actually started in 2010. And our first thing, because Missing didn't really exist at that point, we started mapping sites in Google Maps. So everywhere you see here, and this is something you could do yourself, you can develop your own knotweed map and then upload it to Missing also. But we put a pushpin wherever we saw Japanese knotweed or wherever it was reported to us. And this pink is the one spot on Park Lake where giant knotweed is known to exist in the area. So we care especially about that site because we don't want it to hybridize and create fertile seeds. But just looking at this map, what patterns do you see? Would anybody like to raise their hands? Do you see any? Yes?
Following the roads.
It's following the road. So this is a road. This is Abbott and Chandler Road going due north from the MSU campus. And the more we look, the more we find there. And it's been mowed by the roadside. In fact, there are laws that they have to keep canes out of the roads or the sidewalk for safety reasons, so they can't even stop mowing it is the problem for safety reasons. So any other patterns that you see here? Water. So there's water. This is Lake Lansing. I actually live back here, so I get to see knotweed every morning when I go to work. But so it's Lake Drive, it's along the lake. It's also, there's a ditch system here, there's a ditch system there. This is Sycamore Creek. And we especially care, those would be our top priority areas. Areas where it could be mowed and spread by road crews, or when it can be spread down creeks and streams. I would always start with those areas first. So this issue of prioritization, you can think about private and public natural areas, including wetlands. If you just leave those clumps alone and don't touch them at all, they'll spread rather slowly. But once you get into the situation of having lakes and rivers or trail systems or road, highway, and utility rights-of-ways, these end up being the kind of rapid flow regions. And so this helps you prioritize. And this is a case where like 2 days after I taught a guy in the Vets to Ag program at MSU how to identify knotweed, he said, knotweed is on, it's 2 blocks from my house on the Looking Glass River. And this is a site where the bridge is going over the river here, the river's down there, and the road crew has needed to mow that to keep it out of the roadway, but then you're on a riverbank where it can go down to the river. And so this is a doubly important area to treat knotweed because it can spread in 2 directions at once very rapidly. So we've actually treated half of that in the last week, and we're going back on Sunday to get the rest. Another way to look at how to prioritize is that outliers of the main population, we call those satellites, are like burning embers. They're flying out and they're starting new fires elsewhere. So another way to prioritize, aside from this picking roadside and river or ditch areas, would be to pick outliers in the main population and get them while they're small and easy to control. Because once knotweed is well established, a colony, we've had one colony we've treated for 6 years, and we thought it was gone last year, but we had a very wet spring, and there must have been still viable roots because they sent up a whole bunch of shoots again, and we decided we're going to get you. But you just have to realize there's kind of an up and down trajectory. You have good years, it'll gradually decrease over time, you'll have good years and bad years, but it's best to get it early in the infestation rather than waiting until you have 200 feet by 50 feet of it, and then it's quite a big job. So we actually, like Aaron said, we're trying to fill that niche and working between private landowners and public landowners and working with the agencies that are managing the roadways and lakes and stuff, because it's really a problem for everybody all at once. And so with private landowners, we send them a letter showing them how to ID this plant, that we found it on their land. And it's a lot like the door tags that you have on the table out there, just to let them know. And in our case, it's just been historically a difficult thing for private landowners because the herbicides we use are specialty herbicides. And some people don't feel comfortable mixing them or applying them, even though you certainly can. But so at least initially we started treating on private property with permission just to make it doable so that knotweed would not keep on growing. And if you're interested in really what it takes or what herbicides we know about, not everybody agrees on everything about which herbicides are best, because the herbicides that actually work best on knotweed also have the larger risks to surrounding vegetation. So it's a real trade-off between what's growing around the knotweed and whether you can treat for the next 6 years or whether you really need to get rid of it in 3 years before a construction project. But there's this handout on the table back there that the front side tells you my views on this. Artie Roth, who has a lot of experience in treating knotweed by stem injection, and also Katie Grishat, who's from the Grand Traverse area, who's treated a lot of knotweed. So you get a feeling for what we think the pros and cons, and then you can make decisions on your own about what you feel comfortable with. But there are also many contractors, and there's a handout of contractors too in that brochure. So I would say in general, most landowners are keen to treat, but have found these herbicides intimidating, but we're trying to make this accessible today, both by giving you this information and by doing a demo. So you can see it's not really that much different from the way you would go in your backyard if you had a very bad shrub you wanted to get rid of, you'd spray Roundup on it. Well, we use a version of the Roundup herbicide that's less toxic. It's called aquatic glyphosate, and it's really a very similar process. Okay, so this is me out, my favorite place to be out in a wetland. I just love to be in wetlands. But they're just full of surprises, like native wildflowers this time of year, and sometimes, like one day I almost stepped on a raccoon because it was sleeping on a hummock. So they're really cool places. We also are treating along a roadside across from the DNR area in Bath here. This is Billy and this is Lori treating last July. And the nice thing is when we went back this year, all the knotweed was less than knee height on Billy. And so we reduced it that much in 1 year with an herbicide called Milestone that really doesn't have big off-target effects. So that's a real success case. We keep a daily summary sheet for each treatment site saying what the name of the site, what herbicide. In this case, it was a Phragmites summary sheet, but we do the same for knotweed. We say how much of the site weed was left and how much we were able to treat. So we can really monitor our success year to year at each site. And this is a spreadsheet of some of our sites. We're now keeping our data in a form where we can automatically upload it to the MISN website. So for that, you need a latitude and longitude point, which you can actually read off of the map, or if you just go into MISN Maps and click, it will get that value for you, and you don't have to worry about it. A description of the site, whether it's wet or dry, how much acreage, and this is how we decide our treatment strategy each year. We have this list, we know which owners we have permissions from, and we know where they are. and we develop a campaign just like you were battling some other kind of enemy like a virus or something. It's very similar. I should mention that if you're treating in a site that has standing water at the time of treatment, you do need a DEQ, aquatic nuisance treatment permit. Happily for groups like ours, they let us do a blanket permit for the entire county. So we have actually permits in Ingham County, Clinton County, and Shiawassee County now for treatment. And you just give them a list of all the sites, and those are all covered then under your permit. And now instead of having to do this paperwork every year, it's actually lasts for 3 additional years. So we have this permit now through 2019, and it costs $75, whereas it used to cost $800. So things are just getting better and easier all the time. If you're treating in a right-of-way that is along a roadside, and typically the right-of-way extends 33 feet from the middle of the road if you're on one lane in each direction, so that right-of-way goes maybe 15 feet onto the shoulder. Then you talk to the road commission, and usually that permit is very easy to do with no cost. And you only need to have pesticide applicator certification if you do this for your job. So if you're a homeowner treating on your own land, you don't need to get certified, which is easier. So are there any questions on this stuff? Because this is sort of the more technical things to know. Yes?
Just a couple of things that I ran across a lot with MDOT. As you were in baby shoulder that does travel roadsides and also water bodies. One thing we have some problems with the targeted population for treatment is that if it extends beyond our right of way, you can't go beyond it. So we're constantly fighting to keep it out of the right of way. But then we have a constant source population beyond us. And we contacted some adjacent property owners, and some of them, like you mentioned, are open for us to assist. We can't spend the resources going out to other cheap practices. But one thing I will say is that I got an example with some slides I brought for the breakout session. Some property owners purposely planted it because they like the way it looks. There's one property owner that I got a slide up where he has almost like a privacy fence of Japanese knotweed on his property boundary, and it runs parallel to one of the roads. So it was right at the pavement. We treated it within our right of way, and we approached them about, would you mind if you go back further on your property? No, he said, we put it there for that reason, and we want it.
Well, I think it's like anything. Different people have different viewpoints about the same thing, but sometimes just the issue that it is a constant danger to the infrastructure, to sewer pipes, to foundations, and that it will just constantly spread. So I went to one site about a month ago where somebody had probably done some road fill on the site, and now it's 1.4 acres of solid knotweed, and they want to sell that as 8 lots now. And I don't think they could legally sell that land to an unknowing buyer because nothing could be built there, And so I think trying to convince maybe such people that it's harmful to their property value and probably harmful to their infrastructure, that there are other kinds of screens that would be equally nice looking but less dangerous. But, I think, sometimes they see once you treat it on other sites that, oh, the results were good, and then there's sort of a peer pressure from neighbors that sometimes it just sorts out by itself, but we won't get every patch of knotweed, that's for sure, but we can keep most of it, I think, subdued. So this is another success case where there are 2 main chemicals that we use to control knotweed. One is called imazapyr, and that's the one that's approved for wetland use. And it used to be that people were using, instead of 0.5% concentration, we're using 1 to 2%, and it really risked damaging nearby trees, like trees within 2 drip lines could absorb the chemical and die from it. And so that was very disturbing, but we found that if you lower the concentration, even in this park where they just planted young oak trees within 3 feet of the knotweed infestation, that we were able to kill the knotweed. This is what it looks like when it's dead. It looks kind of like purple fluffy stuff from the stalks. and the young oaks in these neighboring trees did fine. So it's a fine line. You have to really sometimes experiment and try to lower the concentration as much as you can to be effective. But this was a good success for us.
Leslie?
Yes?
Over here, ready first.
Oh, sorry, I missed you.
You were talking about Roundup, and we had experience with it working in fisheries, and we looked at, they had the aquatic version and then the regular Roundup. At that time, we found out they were exactly the same. They were charging us more for the aquatic version. The fellow from DEQ and I had come across that, and we checked into it, he got a hold of it. The guy in charge of developing that with, who is it? And tongue in cheek, the guy finally admitted they're both the same. They're
Well,
one version and the other. And he says, don't tell anybody, I could get fired. He says, we're doing this because we got to recover our research money that we get. They're exactly the same, so Don says, so therefore we can use the regular version, we have to pay our budgets tight. It saves us a lot of money.
It's not quite that simple. I think
Now, I would check though to see if it's still the same, but it was obvious when we looked at the two containers and then we called them and they couldn't deny it. It was exactly the same material.
well, that's an excellent point for me to clarify. So my day job, I'm a biochemistry professor, so I deal with chemicals and their extent for harm or helping humans. And I think the tricky thing is glyphosate is the active ingredient in both Roundup and in aquatic glyphosate formulations. But chemical companies are only required to list the active ingredient, and they don't list what's called the adjuvant or the vehicle. So when you buy Roundup, if you buy the concentrated form, it's like 54% glyphosate. But what is the other 46%? And most of that other 46% is petroleum. And petroleum in 1 part per billion makes water undrinkable. And it's worse than that for frogs and salamanders and fish and wetland organisms that have porous skins that absorb the petroleum. And so it's absolutely verboten. It's absolutely forbidden by law and also by environmental considerations to use Roundup in a wetland. But the active ingredient in Roundup, which is glyphosate, can be used when it's the so-called aquatic formulation, which is designed to not have petroleum in it, to be something that's soluble in water. So if you put Roundup in water, it would beat up and form an oily pool, and that oil phase is what's the problem. And so never use Roundup or any terrestrial glyphosate in any aquatic situation, because you'll be killing every frog and every salamander and fish and birds, and it will be in the soil. Yes?
It needs to be labeled as an aquatic herbicide, and that's done through EPA. And what is on the label is the law as far as what that herbicide can be used for. So there are similar products, like you mentioned, it's not labeled for aquatic use, then it doesn't have the formulation tweaks.
Right.
And you can also need, if you're doing an aquatic application, you need the category 5 certification.
Right. So you need aquatic certification. So I think, on this sheet here, we list 2 of the commonly available aquatic ones. One is called Rodeo. You can imagine that was made by Monsanto too. There's Rodeo and there's Roundup. Rodeo is good, and we don't use Roundup at all because we're even concerned in upland situations that the laying down some petroleum on the soil all the time has many effects that we can't even monitor. So we recommend Rodeo and Aquaneed, or another one is called Shore Clear, that are safe for aquatic environments. So anyway, so looking at some success stories, this was the first site we ever treated. It's on the edge of a wetland. In the old days, we were told mow first, treat afterwards, because the plant's more susceptible to the herbicide. We no longer do that because just the danger of the stalks moving somewhere else and starting new plants. But you can see that this is the first site we ever treated. In year 1, we treated it. Year 3, there's no knotweed left, and the trees are doing well, and the wetland is fine. So It really is safe, you just need to be careful about what herbicides you use and how much. So this is what happens if you mow knotweed. This neighbor had a little shack, he had an old-fashioned farmhouse over here, and knotweed was spreading, so he just kept on mowing it and mowing it and mowing it. And his property is just covered with knotweed of all heights, so these are not, that's knotweed, that's knotweed, you know, it's just all over the place. So going out and talking to people, even if they don't want to treat, just saying, don't mow it because mowing it is only going to spread it, is an important thing. Another thing that we find is that when people don't like knotweed, they cut it on their land and they throw it across the road. And DNR in our area has a problem. People donate knotweed to their parking lots all the time. So a lot of the knotweed, I mean, I'd say probably a third of the cases that we treat, we can see where it came from across the road. Somebody cutting through. And so this is the kind of thing we don't like to see. We put up signs, you know, your yard waste is spreading Japanese knotweed, and that helps. And so it's a matter of changing people's practice, and newspaper articles and talking to your friends can really help with that. And also meeting with park mowing staff and road commission crews to let them know maybe what you can do is not mow into the knotweed, but create a mulch buffer that separates the grass so that you're not mowing the lawn right up into the edge of the knotweed. And simple things like that can really help. So we also put together monsters in your yard for this time of year, Halloween. What are the plants that you can cut into pieces and they only multiply? And so knotweed is one of them, and Phragmites is another. And this is on our website as well as the slides from this presentation. You can go to, we're a chapter of the Stewardship Network. So if you go to stewardshipnetwork.org/Mid-Michigan Cluster Resources, you'll find this flyer, this talk, and also lots of other information on native plants. And some other helpful resources I mentioned, MichiganInvasives.org. It's great with a training module and fact sheet for knotweed and about 100 other invasive species. You can browse the data to see where there's knotweed near you at NISN and also report it there. There's a really fascinating and kind of horrifying article on the history of knotweed in the control efforts in the UK in this issue of Harper's Magazine from May 2015. And also for those of you who are really interested in protecting your natural areas and learning more about them and learning about invasive species control, there's a really nice two-day conference every year at Michigan State led by the Stewardship Network, where people from all over the country come and share their expertise. There are talks on turtles and talks on raptors. You can go in a room and have a juvenile bald eagle 4 feet from you. And you know, there are all sorts of ways to learn about nature and also invasive species control. And I think that's it for me, and I would be really happy to answer any questions you have.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The ideal time to treat.
So depending on what herbicide, so she was asking about the ideal time to treat. This has information on timing. It depends on the herbicide. So if you're doing stem injection pretty much throughout the season is good, it's my understanding. And Artie Roth is our expert on that, who will be presenting this afternoon on that. If you're using milestone, once the knotweed is 3 to 4 feet tall, for about the next month is the most effective time, and then the efficacy kind of tails off. And milestone can only be used in uplands, but it's quite good. It has very few tree effects. Imazapyr, which is also called, I'm losing it. Imazapyr, which is Habitat. I think it comes in another formulation too, but we've used Habitat. Really from mid-August through the end of, only up to the first hard frost. After the first hard frost, the knotweed will really be limp and won't absorb anything. And so it just depends on the herbicide, and so you have to kind of plan your wetland treatment maybe separately from your upland treatment.
My second question is, it's dead, it's laying there, all the dead. Do you just leave it there, or reabsorb and store, and now need to move and put the yard waste or should it just never catch?
Well, I'd say that the stalks are 100% dead, dry as a bone.
So 2 or 3 years, you have it.
Right. Or you could, if you're not sure, you can bag them, and there's Michigan invasive species law allows you to put that in your trash in the landfill, and then it can't grow because it's going to get buried by tons of other stuff. I actually have not. I put it in black bags, I seal them tightly, and the problem is that not all the trash pickup guys have been educated. So if you label it as anything to do with plants, they may not know about that law. I mean, you can educate them, but I just tend to bag it and put it in the landfill, and it's not an issue. Any other questions? Yes?
I have one clump on my property. Could I possibly put a chain around it and pull it out with my tractor?
That would be fun. You might pull down to the center of the earth, that's the only problem. So I did mention that before the London Olympics, they got rid of all the knotweed in that area of London. It cost them $120 million because it was so established. And what they did is they dug down 10 to 15 feet and moved that whole block of earth. So the problem with knotweed is a root mass. The reason it's so hard to kill is that 80% of the plant is underground, and every year the herbicide is hitting part of that root mass, and then there's more left. So every year you get some more of that root mass, and you can never get it all at once. So I wouldn't try that, because you probably get stimulated. This would be saying, oh, so you want to do battle, do you? Yes?
Define more what you mean using the massive here and two drip lines, what one would need to do in terms of favor.
So a massive here is tricky. We use it in selected sites because it's the most effective herbicide that we use. Aside from, if you can do stem injection and get every stem, then glyphosate stem injection is really the best thing to do. But we have like 0.2 of an acre, and so we can't possibly inject that many stems. But a massive here, we found at 0.5%, it's pretty safe, but if there was a valuable tree within one drip line or something like that, there's just really some risk. And so if it's on your own property, you make that decision. If it's somebody else's property, you just have to let them know. It's your decision. Do you want me to do that, or do you want me to use something less effective in the spring?
Can you define drip lines?
Oh, a drip line, sorry. You're a tree. You're a tree, and your leaves extend out a certain distance. Anywhere where water can drip off from you onto the ground is sort of a drip line. And what that's doing is defining essentially the root mass underneath. This usually extends out as far as the leaves do. So 2 drip lines of a tree, if I'm the trunk and these are where my leaves drip, 2 drip lines is twice as far out as my arm. Does that make sense? I don't have a blackboard or pictures, but about two radiuses, 2 radii of the tree outwards. Okay. Yes?
Just speak a little more about the Michigan invasive species grant. Who is that available?
So the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program, you can look at the Michigan DNR website. That's available to everyone. It's highly competitive. My group applied. We did not get funded, which was a big disappointment, but there's sort of pros and cons. One is that the grants are for 18 months to 2 years. So they're really designed to boot up an effort. But I'm not sure that everybody can count on being funded over and over and over again because the funds are so limited. So it's mainly designed to stimulate and establish new efforts. And you can look at the website. There's a grant cycle. I can't remember what I think the pre-proposals were in the fall and the pre-proposals were in like late spring, early summer. The full proposals that they selected to go in were in the fall, and then people heard in February of this year. But if somebody else is funded to do that in your area already, you probably want to talk with them and coordinate, because they generally don't fund more than one group in one geographical area.
That list of people who are funded.
Yeah, and there is these CISMAs, these cooperative invasive species management areas. Many of them are funded by the Michigan Invasive Species Grant, and the whole thing is a coordinated effort between entities in a region, not one group just working on its own. So, yes?
I use dish soap Dawn for dishes as a spreader sticker or adjuvant. Pros and cons on that.
He's using dish detergent as a spreader sticker adjuvant. I haven't heard of that being done. If it works, I would do it. The Signet Plus, which is what we've used, it's a chemical called D-limonene, and it's actually an FDA-approved food additive that makes muffins taste lemony. It's an extract from lemons, essentially. So this D-limonene that's in that Signet Plus brand is quite non-toxic, and it kind of has the consistency of dish detergent. I mean, I know that detergents break cell membranes, so whether they have more or less effects on what else is in the soil, because the soil is actually a rich community of microbes that are needed to fix nitrogen and assist plant roots and things like that. So I'm a little cautious about, if I don't know the effects of something, putting it in the soil like petroleum or other chemicals, because they can have effects that may not be obvious for a while. So that's the best, but you could Google it, see if somebody's done a study of it. That's probably what I would do. Yes?
For a small clump, you talked about the glyphosate injection.
Yes.
Now, is this pure glyphosate, or are you talking about the Roundup, which is basically a glyphosate base?
Well, like I mentioned, my group chooses not to use Roundup at all because we're concerned about that petroleum staying in the soil and having other toxic effects. But it's basically the strongest concentration glyphosate comes in is in 55%. And it's used in that concentration. And Artie, do you want to raise your hand? Artie is the one in our room that I know has extensive experience with this, so she can help you with the stem injection, and there will be a demonstration. And so, but aquatic or if you choose to use Roundup, but only in an upland area,